Hey everyone, we're grateful for your support and hope our podcast has been helpful in both your personal and professional journey. We've added new continuing education webinars to our website. And as you renew your license, head over and check out our available courses. We'll be adding even more in the future, so stay tuned. And now, without further ado, let's dive into today's episode. When we think about mental health and wellness, do we ever consider the everyday portrayal of women in media? Especially when it comes to women of color. Even more salient, the challenges that Black women face when it comes to mental well-being and how these challenges can be further complicated by the often stereotypical and one-dimensional portrayals we see on screen and in magazines. When it comes to mental health, the experiences of Black women in America are unique and often overshadowed. So who better to tell the story than the women living it? Welcome to People of Color in Psychology, the show that explores mental health topics specific to culture, diversity, and communities of color. I am your host, Jack Tsen. Our guest today is Dr. Jasmine Ross, a licensed psychologist in private practice for over 10 years and the founder of Essence Psychological Health Services. Dr. Ross specializes in women and well-being with an emphasis on how race, sexuality, gender, and socioeconomic status can impact health. Dr. Ross has a clinical focus area on women's reproductive challenges, perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, trauma, loss, and early infant mortality. In addition to her clinical work, Dr. Ross offers consultation support for artists and creators in accurately capturing the nuances of women's mental health. As an African American psychologist, Dr. Ross will be discussing transforming the portrayal of women in the entertainment industry by promoting accurate, nuanced, compassionate, and impactful stories. Dr. Ross, welcome to our show today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here.
Tell me about some of the work that you're doing right now.
Sure. So I've been in the field for almost 15 years now. And, one of the things that I can say about the work that I've done so far, it's been focused primarily on women. So women's mental health has been a strong passion of mine. So one of the benefits that I had throughout my training and early in my career is to be able to work in a number of different settings, but being able to focus my work on women. So women in prison settings, women in psychiatric hospitals, community mental health, you name it, I pretty much worked in those settings, and being able in those settings to look specifically at the experiences of women. So my passion thus far has been on women, but personally, I've always been passionate about and inspired by entertainment, the arts. Those things have been really passion of mine personally. And so what I'm doing now is really looking at an intersection between the experiences of women specifically around their mental health and how those ideas are impacted by, but also portrayed in the entertainment industry. So, for instance, my dissertation research looked at the influence of hip hop culture on African-American women's sexual scripts. So that was the intersection of women's mental health in a major industry of hip hop. Being a Bronx native, the birthplace of hip hop culture is very, very important to me. And so as a lover of hip hop, it gives me the opportunity to really love that art form, but also be critical of it in the ways in which it may portray women in a negative light. So stemming from that early research that I did on my dissertation, I've always been thinking about, okay, how do women see themselves through the lens of media? How does the media portray women's experiences? And what ways can folks like myself in the field of psychology use our expertise in order to inform and support those creators of the art form to make sure that the art that they're producing about women, about members of other marginalized groups, about people experiencing mental health challenges, how can they create art that is more accurate, nuanced, compassionate, and ultimately impactful?
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing that. And one thing our listeners may not know is that Dr. Ross, you and I went to the same grad program. And so, I really love the dissertation. When I heard about it at the time, I was, wait, hip hop? I didn't quite get it. Okay.
Uh-huh.
And so can you bring it to now where for listeners who may not quite understand,
Sure.
wait, how does entertainment, hip hop have to do with women's mental health. And particularly, you have a very nuanced view because it's just not women in general. You have a very niche and specialized perspective,
For
and that
sure.
is African American women portrayal in hip hop.
Sure. And thank you for asking the question, because very often when I share my interest, people say, huh, that's interesting. And they scratch their heads because they're not sure how the ideas and the industries connect. Well, if you think specifically about hip hop per se, hip hop is a culture embedded within a larger culture. And very often we see as subcultures developed, in the development of those cultures are embedded ideas, myths, schemas, stereotypes about other groups, other population, other phenomenon. So, one of the things that I found in my dissertation was that embedded in hip hop culture were a lot of narratives, in many instances, false narratives and stereotypes about Black womanhood. So oftentimes when we think about how Black people are portrayed in various industries and entertainment, we think about some old stereotypes like the mammy, the Jezebel, right? These ideas about what it means to be Black women, about Black women's sexuality. And so embedded in those ideas are these dichotomy that Black women are either hypersexual or they're asexual, and their existence is supposed to center on caring for white people. And so those are bigger ideas that come essentially out of slavery and discrimination, and ideas that are about Black people that we found through the course of my research that they were just reimagined in hip hop culture. So a lot of the images, a lot of the ideas, a lot of the lyrics that were coming out of hip hop culture embodied those ideas just in modern form. And so in looking at that and then talking with the women that were consuming it, when they saw these figures in hip hop that they then started to emulate, they were again embodying these stereotypes about Black womanhood. And, the risk of these stereotypes is that they're very limited, right? They're ultimately inaccurate, and they don't speak to all of what it means to be a Black woman, especially a Black woman from, that is consuming hip hop culture. And so, extrapolating that to other types of media, just thinking about, okay, how does media depict individuals from marginalized groups? And are they doing so accurately? Are they expressing the full breadth of what it might be for a Black woman from the South Bronx like myself to experience any type of phenomena, or a Black woman anywhere else, or a Latinx woman, or, some other woman? Do these art forms truly reflect who they are? If not, then what needs to happen at the point of developing the art to make sure that the ideas about this true experience are truly captured in that art form, so that once it's projected outward to the larger society, they are getting an idea of what it really means to have this lived experience.
Yeah, it's you're talking about that. I also imagine the pain and suffering that it causes when Black women are consuming the media, and if they're not critically looking at what's the stereotype, what's the trope, and remind our listeners your clients are artists. Tell me more about your clients.
For sure. Yeah, no, I'm really excited about the opportunity to support artists of all forms. So that can be from someone that is a content creator that is generating content on TikTok or Instagram, to a movie director that is, developing a film, or a writer, playwright, anyone that is creating this art that has in mind the idea to portray the story of a woman, particularly around her mental health experience, because we know as well, another marginalized population is individuals that are living with mental health conditions. Now, even though we know that so many people in our population struggle with any type of mental health condition at any point, we understand that it is a stigmatized experience. And so very often the depictions of some type of mental health crises or phenomena is not always depicted in a manner that's accurate, or that speaks to just the whole person outside of that psychological experience. And so, I think that as a psychologist with this training specialized with women, I could be there in those formative stages of helping someone develop a script, or coming up with a social media platform or campaign, just to help them to make sure that, okay, this is what I'm trying to capture. Does this line up well with an individual's lived experience? And what type of message am I putting out there for the public to consume? Because ultimately the entertainment industry is about consumption, right? There's an idea that we will be advancing in this art. So how can we make sure that that art form is impactful, not just to the people that are being depicted, but also to the audience as well?
And when you say entertainment industry, I imagine we're not just talking about, Hollywood. You have a robust definition of entertainment industry that can actually apply to a lot of clienteles. Tell me about that.
Absolutely. And you're right. When most people traditionally think of entertainment, they do. They think of Hollywood, they think of these large scale productions. But if you think about it, within the last 10 years, entertainment has expanded to include social media. Right? Most of the entertainers now are influencers. These are people that just are armed with their camera phone that are generating content, and this content is creating trends that is shifting our culture. And so I would argue that an influencer can have far more influence than a playwright or a script writer because they can generate content so quickly. And that content, if people latch onto it, and it doesn't take long for something to go viral, if people latch onto it, they can shift the culture. Whereas, most films take about 6 months to a year, if not longer, to produce, right? It's going to take a longer time for, Hollywood to have an impact. Now, once they do put that film out there, if the public latches onto it, then it can be impactful. But in that time, an influencer could have blown up, and created a lot of content that can really shift our understanding of marginalized groups, psychological phenomenon, for better or for worse. And so, for me, that's why entertainment has to include, the current trends and shifts that are happening in terms of the people that are influencing the information and the art that we're ultimately consuming.
Do you have anything else you'd like to share with our listeners about your current work?
Sure. So, ultimately, the work that I'm interested in is around this idea of storytelling. And so storytelling happens in multiple ways. And so directly in the day-to-day work that I do in my practice, Essence Psychological Health Services, it is around supporting and encouraging women to create their best lives. And a part of that is navigating through, the day-to-day challenges that they're having, the trauma that they've experienced. And once they've gotten to a place of feeling like the symptoms and the challenges are under control, then what story are they going to tell themselves about what those experiences have meant to them in the past and what it'll mean for them moving forward? So in that way, the stories that they're telling are about the lives that they want to live and about ultimately empowering themselves and acknowledging the resilience that they have based upon the stories that they've lived thus far. And so, empowering women to tell their own stories and also supporting them if they desire to be in the industry and be the ones telling their stories. But also when people choose to tell stories about women, supporting those artists to make sure that those stories are accurate, nuanced, compassionate, and impactful.
Mhm. And so, speaking of stories, can you share with us any memorable events and circumstances that influenced how you got into this work as a psychologist and in having this niche sector that you're in?
For sure. My experiences as a Black woman are inextricably linked to my identity as a psychologist. So getting into the field, it was about really understanding folks' mental health experiences and phenomenon, but particularly those of people like me, women. But, it wasn't until in my personal life I experienced some significant losses, reproductive health losses. I experienced 2 stillbirths, right? And so in having that experience and experiencing a sense of isolation and disconnection and just feeling misunderstood, I just felt this great need for connection to other women that understood the walk that I was on. And so thankfully, I was able to then go through my own healing process. And, through that, I wanted to be able to provide a space for other women on that journey to be able to feel connected, but to then also figure out, okay, what is the story about this, right? What is the lasting impact or effect that I want this experience to have on me moving forward? Because that was something that I had to go through, right? Having to challenge some of the thoughts and ideas that are really common for women that experience reproductive health challenges or losses, feeling that your body has failed or that you're somehow defective or that you're not a good mother. Those are all ideas that I needed to shift. And so going on my own journey and working to develop my own story, I really understood on a very deep level the importance of stories, especially for women. And so in the work, I sometimes am shocked thinking about the fact that I'm at the 10-year mark of my private practice, right? Because so much of life has happened that you don't realize how quickly things move by. But at the 10-year mark, having been blessed with the opportunity to work with so many women that experience some of the darkest spaces of their lives, but to come out on the other side with a story that they're proud of, a story that they can use to inspire other people and that they can share with other people about that experience, it makes me feel really proud of that. And so at this point of 10 years, having had done the work really around this storytelling, wanted to look a little broader, right? Think about, okay, how else can we impact women through the act of storytelling? And I see art and entertainment as one of the ways to do that, by one, generating art, but also challenging the art that's currently out there if it's not hitting the mark.
Wow. Well, Dr. Ross, I'm sorry about the experience you had. And also, in many ways, just coming out of that, creating a story that, as you're talking about that, has so much passion and care for helping other women, because it's like understanding the pain and trying to help them move out of that.
Mhm.
And something I shared with you is, when you jump to private practice, in many ways, I was too scared to jump back to private practice after grad school. So knowing that you had done that, oh my goodness, wow, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's so funny, like taking risks and leaping sometimes without looking, it just has been a theme in my life. I mean, that's how I ended up in Texas from the Bronx, right? Of all places. So just taking these leaps. And, to be honest, it's often very scary. And I look back like, what am I doing? But I'm here now, so I have to keep going. But it's something that I feel really good about at this point in my life. I can feel proud of this part of myself, this ability to be able to take risk on behalf of myself, on behalf of my dreams. And ultimately, that's what's brought me to this point. One say, hey, I'm really interested in the entertainment industry and I'd like to make change, and I'd like to be able to, lend my expertise to this other industry. That's really risky. A lot of people in our field might not be willing to do something like that. But, I found that when I have the faith in, my higher power and in myself to do something that's really scary, it benefits me. And so, to any other psychologist out there, specifically a psychologist of color that is interested in another industry, I encourage them to figure out what it would look like for them to be able to take that risk to try something different for their own benefit, but also to the benefit of that industry. Because, not just toot our own horn as psychologists, but we really do have a lot to offer. And many industries, not just the entertainment industry, they struggle with a lack of representation of people of color. So I think that there definitely can be a place for psychologists of color in other industries. And if there's not one there, not a space there yet, we can do the work to create one for ourselves.
So, in thinking about this, you mentioned, in certain industries like, media, there may be a lack of representation. So, in your career as a person of color, what were some challenges you faced and overcame that you would be willing to share?
Sure. I think it's so funny. One of the challenges that I face, and I still face today, is people questioning directly and indirectly questioning my credibility and my credentials. So oftentimes I'll introduce myself as Dr. Ross. I'll say I'm a licensed psychologist, and people will often look at me with a puzzled look on their face, or to say, oh no, you're a master's level clinician. So just challenging my credentials. And I can recall an instance when I was working in a hospital setting. I was talking with a senior psychologist. I was new to the team. I was introducing myself to him. And I said, I'm Dr. Ross. I have my degree from this place. And he said, no, you're a master's level clinician. I said, no, I'm a psychologist. He said, no, you're a master's level. I said, no, I am a psychologist. I have the student loans to prove it, right? And then he's like, oh, my apologies. You just must be exceptional then. Right. So first, it was his disbelief that I could be a psychologist, his affirming that, him being clear that I could not be a psychologist. I was a master's level clinician. And then we finally got to the point of accepting that I was a psychologist. It was only because I was exceptional, or somehow a credit to my race, that I was able to be there in the position that I was. And so, unfortunately, that's not the first time something like that has happened. I would say that was probably one of the more egregious. experiences that I've had, but it does happen because, unfortunately, when many people think of a psychologist, the idea that comes into their mind is of a white man, not a Black woman. And so for me, presenting myself as a psychologist, it just did not fit with his idea of what a psychologist was. So, I'm so appreciative of platforms like this one, which is really centering and amplifying the voices of psychologists of color, because more people just need to know that we are here, we are impactful, and we have a tremendous amount to offer to the field of psychology and also to other fields and industries.
Yeah, in many ways, making yourself known. And gosh, to be in a work environment and faced with those questions constantly, it's frustrating because it's talked about quite a lot
Mhm.
amongst a lot of the guests that's been on the show. Just being challenged. I mean, you've already told them, "Hey, I'm a psychologist," and to deliberately question that.
Mhm.
So, for you, what does it mean to be an African American psychologist?
Yeah, it's it's interesting because like my identity as a Black woman is intertwined with my identity as a psychologist because it's the only psychologist that I've ever been. I've only been a Black woman psychologist. So it is a part of my identity as a psychologist. And I feel with it for me personally is the responsibility to amplify the voices of my clients that come from marginalized groups, to be considering the intersectionality of different parts of an individual's identity, whether they be a Black woman or not, because, of an understanding of myself and the intersection of me being a Black woman, born and raised in an urban area, having these ideas, all of those things influence my understanding of the world and the way that the world sees me. So it creates for me a duty to, be considerate of other people and all of the pieces of who they are as I work with them as well.
And so, Dr. Ross, how do we support you?
Hmm. Well, the first thing that you can do is definitely check out my website, engage with me on social media. But, I think about the idea of storytelling. What are the stories that you tell yourself about who you are, where you've been, and where you can go moving forward? And also, if you are engaged with social media, engaged with different creators that are telling stories that don't accurately depict your experience or the experience of others, call them on it. And if you know of any artists that could use support in the development of their art, send them over to me because I'm happy to support different artists. I'm also happy to work with faculty in film and different art departments that are training up the next generation of artists to make sure that the work that they create is accurate, nuanced, compassionate, and impactful. I do have a resource that I'm happy to share with you and happy to share with your listeners that gives folks some ideas of some ethical considerations to make when they're developing art, to make sure that it's mindful and compassionate to women, other marginalized groups, and individuals experiencing mental health challenges. So I'm happy to share that with you guys so that we could all be thinking about how we can depict other people's experiences in a way that is most accurate and compassionate to them.
And any final thoughts?
Thank you so much. Again, my challenge to psychologists of color is to recognize that your experiences in this industry, your experiences as people of color are valuable and can be a benefit to other industries. There's so much that we can do in our field and beyond. And I just am excited to think about the opportunities for myself and others in other spaces.
All right. Well, Dr. Ross, thank you so much for your time. And, I'm so honored to have known you in grad school and know you now and have this delightful conversation. Again, just thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dak, for the opportunity. And thank you for this powerful podcast. It's much needed and right on time. So thank you so much.
A huge thank you to our listeners. If you enjoyed this episode, please share and subscribe to People of Color in Psychology. You can also support us by registering for continuing education courses or making a one-time donation on the Multicultural Counseling Institute's website. Your feedback is important to us, so feel free to send an email, a message on LinkedIn, or leave a voice message on our website. Until next time, this is your host, Jack Sun.